Why did no one in town ever really know who she was? That question would haunt Clearwater for years. To most, Alexandra Morrison was just a quiet ranch woman, 29 years old, denim shirt always rolled up at the sleeves, hair in a messy bun, face tan from Wyoming sun. She worked sunup to sundown, repairing fences, herding cattle, fixing whatever broke. She smiled when people waved. She brought pie to the church fundraiser. She laughed when the old men at the diner called her city girl. But there was something in her eyes that made even the sheriff pause. That kind of calm you only see in people who have stood on the edge before, stared into chaos, and come back different. That Tuesday started like any other. The sky stretched wide and endless, the color of steel. Wind carried the smell of rain through the hills. Alexandra was mending the old barn door when she heard it, faint at first, then growing louder. The sound of engines, not one, dozens. She froze. 35 motorcycles cutting across the valley, rumbling like thunder. To anyone else it would have just been noise, maybe a group ride heading toward the next town. But she heard it differently. The rhythm of formation, the way the engines held sync, rising and falling in practiced unison. It wasn't casual, it was deliberate. She walked out of the barn, wiped her hands on her jeans, and looked toward Main Street. From her hilltop ranch, she could see the town 2 miles away, the small grocery, the gas station, the sheriff's office. She watched as black dots swarmed in, filling every space. She knew that kind of movement, because once upon a time, she'd led people who moved just like that. But those days were supposed to be over. She went back to work, tried to ignore it, tried to be what she'd promised herself she'd become, just a rancher, just a woman trying to live quietly after 9 years of classified missions that never made the news. For a while, she almost believed she could. But peace is fragile when your past has blood in it. Down in town, Sheriff Tom Mitchell was standing outside his office with his young deputy, staring at the wall of bikers that had just rolled in. 35 men in black leather jackets marked with a skull and chain insignia, Iron Skulls MC. Victor Kane led them, 6'4", 280 pounds, all tattoos and arrogance. He'd spent more than a decade in prison before deciding extortion paid better than parole. He walked right up to the sheriff, cigarette between his lips. "Nice little town you got here," he said, his voice smooth, too calm. Tom didn't answer at first. He'd seen men like this before, predators who smiled before they bit. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Victor smiled wider. "We're just passing through, but passing through costs money. Gas, food, lodging. Figure the good people of Clearwater might want to help out. Call it a hospitality tax." "That's called extortion," Tom said. Victor exhaled smoke, slow and lazy. "Call it whatever makes you sleep at night, Sheriff. Either way, we're collecting." 8 bikers dismounted, fanning out across the street. They didn't draw weapons, they didn't need to. Their presence was the weapon. The town went quiet. Shop doors closed. Curtains shifted. Everyone knew what was happening and no one could stop it. Because Clearwater had 2 deputies, 1 sheriff and backup that was at least 3 hours away. By sundown, Iron Skulls owned the town. Patricia Henderson's cafe was first. The old woman refused to pay. They smashed her coffee station, dumped sugar across the floor, and left her trembling behind the counter. The hardware store, the gas station, the feed supply, all paid. By the end of the afternoon, they'd collected nearly $9,000 in cash and favors. Victor sat outside the cafe, drinking free coffee. "Easy money," he said, watching his men swagger through the street. That's when one of them, a wiry guy with a scorpion tattoo on his neck, asked, "Boss, what about the ranches? Big money out there. Livestock, machinery, safes." Victor looked up toward the hills. He'd seen that ranch earlier when they rode in, the one with wide pastures and a lone farmhouse overlooking the valley. A woman worked there, alone. He grinned. "Yeah," he said, "let's pay her a visit." Back on the hill, Alexandra was brushing down her horse when the sound came again, closer this time. 11 engines, gravel crunching. She stepped out into the sunlight, wiped sweat from her brow, and watched the dust cloud snake up her driveway. Part of her still wanted to believe they'd pass by, but deep down she knew better. She slipped her phone into her back pocket, just in case. The motorcycles stopped in a half circle in front of her house, engines rumbling like beasts waiting to pounce. Victor Kane stepped off his bike first, followed by 10 others. He smiled, the kind of smile that made most people look away. Afternoon sun glinted off his sunglasses as he took a step toward her. "Afternoon, miss," he said. "Beautiful property you got here." Alexandra didn't reply. She just watched him, her eyes calm but unblinking. "See," Victor continued, "we've been offering some, let's say, security services in town, making sure folks stay safe. Thought we'd extend the same courtesy to you." "I don't need security," Alexandra said quietly. Victor's grin widened. "That's where you're wrong. Lot of bad people out there. Fires, accidents, thefts. You're all alone out here. Anything could happen." "I'm not alone." He laughed. "Really, I don't see anyone else, just you and your horses." He took another step forward. "Here's the deal, sweetheart. You give us $3,000 and we make sure nothing bad happens. Sound fair?" She didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm going to give you one chance," she said, voice calm, steady. "Get on your bikes, leave now." The men around him laughed. Victor did too. "You serious? You're outnumbered 11-1. Alexandra's eyes didn't waver. "Then you should have brought more." Victor reached out to grab her arm. He never touched her. In less than a second she moved faster than his eyes could track. One twist, one pivot, and the massive biker was on his knees, gasping, his arm locked in a painful hold. "Stay where you are," she said to the others, her voice sharp, commanding. For a moment, no one dared move. Then one of them, Marcus, the one with the chain tattoo, reached for his gun. Alexandra released Victor, and the world seemed to slow. She stepped in, struck Marcus in the solar plexus, twisted, and dropped him flat in the dirt. Before he could breathe again, she pivoted, blocked a second attacker, and sent him crashing into his own bike. Another came from the side. She ducked, used his momentum, and slammed him into the barn wall. 15 seconds, 5 men down. The rest froze. Victor stumbled back to his feet, fury and humiliation burning in his eyes. "You're dead, you hear me? We'll burn this place down." "No," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You won't." She took out her phone, thumbed a number, pressed call. "Cooper," she said when the line clicked. "Code Silver, 35 total, 11 here, I've handled 5. The rest are in town, split into 3 groups, ETA." A deep voice answered, calm, 19 minutes, containment affirmative. She ended the call, looked back at Victor. "You should have left when you had the chance." Victor's mouth went dry. "Who did you just call?" Alexandra didn't answer. She walked up her porch steps, sat down, and folded her hands like she had all the time in the world. Because she did. 19 miles away, a man named Jake Cooper shut off his welding torch and took off his mask. His phone still glowed with her name. He didn't ask questions, just said one word, "moving." Then he opened another line, "Martinez, Taylor, Kim, Bennett." Within 90 seconds, 5 people across 3 states stopped what they were doing and moved. Luis Martinez dropped his construction tools. Rachel Taylor closed her veterinary clinic mid-appointment. Sandra Kim left a half-eaten sandwich in a diner booth. David Bennett shut his laptop, grabbed his keys. None of them asked why. Because when Ghost called, you didn't ask, you moved. Each of them owed her everything. She'd carried Cooper out of Fallujah when his leg was shattered. She crossed the Mexican border alone to bring Martinez home from a cartel cell. She rescued Rachel's kidnapped sister, against orders, against logic. She pulled Kim from a burning convoy and Bennett from a kill zone with 47 seconds to spare. And all of them had promised the same thing. If she ever called, they would come. 5 pickup trucks turned onto Highway 89, kicking up dust. They didn't use sirens. They didn't use radios, just headlights and silent conviction. 19 minutes. Back on the ranch, the Iron Skulls didn't know it yet, but their countdown had started. Victor Kane thought he'd found easy prey, a quiet woman with calloused hands and a lonely house. But some predators don't realize when they've stepped into another predator's den. Alexandra Morrison had been pretending to be normal for 2 years, but predators never forget how to hunt. And this time, the hunt was coming for them. Why did she call them? That question sat heavy in Alexandra's chest as she watched the horizon. The wind had shifted, warm air now carried the low hum of distant engines, not the coarse, chaotic roar of motorcycles, but the disciplined, measured rhythm of trucks in formation. She'd heard that sound before. It used to mean extraction. It used to mean hope. Now it meant ghosts of her past coming back to life. She stood barefoot in the gravel, denim shirt still streaked with dirt, her pulse steady, though her hands trembled when she looked down at them. The men across from her, 11 bikers, sat or stood in silence, unsure what to do. They'd seen her move. They'd seen what she was capable of. But they hadn't yet seen what was coming. Victor Kane leaned against his bike, nursing his twisted arm. The anger in his eyes had changed. Less fury now, more fear. "You really think your little friends are gonna save you?" he said. Alexandra didn't answer. He laughed dry, hollow. "Lady, when my boys get back from town, you'll be the one begging." But the words didn't carry weight anymore. He was talking to convince himself he still had control. Deep down, he felt it, that sinking dread in the gut that told you the fight was already over. Still, Alexandra said nothing. She just watched the long dirt road stretch out to the horizon, where the heat shimmered like waves. Then faintly, dust appeared, 5 plumes cutting across the plain. Jake Cooper was leading. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. The last time was at her retirement ceremony, small, quiet, behind closed doors. She remembered the look on his face when she'd told him she was leaving for good. "You don't walk away from who you are," he'd said. But she'd tried. And now he was back because she'd failed to stay gone. The trucks rolled in, calm, deliberate, stopping in a perfect half-circle facing the bikers. Doors opened simultaneously. 5 people stepped out. No uniforms, no insignia, just jeans, flannel shirts, work boots, and the kind of eyes that didn't need introduction. Jake Cooper walked toward her first 6 feet of quiet authority, his beard flecked with gray, posture relaxed but aware. He stopped halfway, boots crunching on gravel. "Ghost," he said softly. "Cooper." No salute, no handshake, just a shared look, 2 soldiers who'd been to hell and back and still carried the smell of smoke in their souls. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Always." He glanced over her shoulder at the bikers. "These the ones. 11 here, 24 in town, split into 2 groups." He nodded once, calculating. "We'll take care of it." Luis Martinez stepped out of the second truck, thick-set and scarred, hands like granite. "How bad?" "5 injured," Alexandra said, "mostly pride." Rachel Taylor, tall and calm, adjusted the strap of her vest. "Want us to emphasize your point?" "Your presence should be enough," Alexandra said. Then, after a pause, her lips almost curled into a smile. "Probably." Victor Kane's laughter was gone now. He stared at them, at the way they moved, how they didn't talk over each other, how their eyes scanned everything. He recognized it, even if he couldn't name it. Discipline, control, danger. The smaller woman, Sandra Kim, was already assessing the scene. Her tone was factual, cold. "Iron Skulls MC, 35 confirmed members, extortion, narcotics, weapons trafficking. You boys are on 6 federal watch lists. David Bennett was on his phone talking quietly to someone. Sheriff's pinned down in town. State Patrol's still 70 minutes out. We've got operational freedom. Victor swallowed. Who the hell are you people? Jake looked at him for a long moment, then said simply, Friends of Alexandra. Victor's jaw tightened. Alexandra. She met his eyes, her voice calm as stone. That's my name, but you might know me by another one. She waited, let the silence stretch, let the wind carry the weight of her next words. Ghost. It hit like a gunshot. For a moment no one moved, even the air seemed to pause. Then Marcus, the one she dropped earlier, whispered, Ghost, the Kandahar ghost. His voice cracked. You're kidding. Lewis tilted his head. Heard of her? Marcus nodded, his face pale. Everyone's heard of her. The operator who walked into Somalia alone and walked out with 12 hostages. The one who took down a whole cell in Helmand. The one they said. Stories grow in the telling, Alexandra interrupted quietly. Don't believe everything you hear. But Victor wasn't listening anymore. He was replaying every second since they'd arrived, her calm, her precision, the phone call. He thought she was some scared farm girl. He thought he was the predator. He'd never been more wrong in his life. Jake turned to Alexandra. You want us to contain or eliminate? Contain, she said. They're still human, barely. Rachel and Lewis exchanged a look. Sandra smiled faintly. Copy that. They split without another word. Years of unspoken coordination guided every step. 2 trucks rolled toward town, 2 stayed. Jake stayed with Alexandra. The bikers shifted, uneasy. They weren't used to silence like this, the kind that presses down, heavy, suffocating. Jake stood beside her, scanning the horizon. You did good calling us, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, I just dragged everyone back into something they swore off. He looked at her then, really looked. You think you can bury who you are. You think peace comes from pretending you weren't built for the fight. She didn't answer. He softened. You saved our lives, Ghost, every one of us. You carried us when no one else would. You've earned quiet, but sometimes quiet finds trouble. She sighed. I didn't want to be this person anymore. Then don't be, Jake said. Just be someone who defends what's hers. She glanced toward the barn where the horses had gone still, sensing the tension. They came to take what wasn't theirs. I warned them. Jake smirked. You always do. Back in town, Sandra and David reached Main Street first. The place looked deserted. Windows shattered. Store signs tilted. Bikers lounged on benches and steps, smoking, drinking, laughing, unaware their reign was minutes from ending. Sheriff Mitchell spotted them from his office door and walked out, his hand hovering near his weapon. Something in the way the newcomers carried themselves, that quiet precision, told him they weren't just passers-by. Sheriff Tom Mitchell, he said, offering a cautious nod. David Bennett, the man replied. That's Sandra Kim, we're here to help. Tom frowned. You and what army? Sandra looked down the street, assessing the 24 armed men scattered across 3 blocks. Then she smiled. We don't need an army. 4, David added, as 2 more figures appeared, Rachel and Lewis, approaching from opposite ends of Main Street. Tom blinked. 4 of you against them. Sandra's expression didn't change. We're not here to fight, we're here to end it. There was something in her tone that made Tom take a step back, not out of fear, but out of instinct. He turned to his deputy. Get everyone inside, now. And then it began. Lewis walked straight up to the largest group of bikers outside the cafe, 9 of them clustered around tables. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just said calmly, time to leave. The bikers laughed. One of them stood. What's it to you, old man? Lewis didn't answer. He bent, grabbed the nearest motorcycle, 600 pounds of chrome and steel, and lifted it. Not completely, but enough to move it several feet across the pavement before setting it down gently. The laughter stopped. Rachel stepped forward. "We can do this easy," she said, voice soft. "Or we can do it hard, your choice." They chose wrong. Two lunged. One swung a chain. Rachel sidestepped, used his momentum, and flipped him over her shoulder. Lewis blocked another with his forearm, delivered a single, sharp strike to the solar plexus. The man dropped. It took 15 seconds, 3 down. Sandra and David were dealing with the other group near the gas station. 40 seconds, Sandra said calmly. "Get on your bikes and leave. After that, we stop being polite." One biker sneered. "Lady, you're out of your damn mind." He reached for her arm. He never saw her move. A joint lock, a pivot, and he was face down on the asphalt before his brain caught up. The rest watched, then scrambled. Engines roared to life. Within 4 minutes, Clearwater's Main Street was empty, except for a few bruised egos and 7 men too injured to ride. Sheriff Mitchell stepped into the silence, eyes wide. "Who are you people?" Lewis dusted his hands. "Nobody special," he said. "Just friends helping a friend." They turned toward the hills, toward the ranch. Jake's radio crackled softly. "Town secure. All units returning." He glanced at Alexandra. "Told you, 19 minutes." For the first time that day, she smiled, tired, small but real. "Welcome home, Ghost," he said. But she didn't answer, because in her heart she knew this wasn't home. It was just another battlefield with better scenery. As the sun dipped low over the plains, the dust settled on Clearwater. And in that quiet golden light, one truth stood clear. You can try to leave the war behind, but sometimes the war finds you anyway. How do you end a fight you never wanted to start? That was the question Alexandra kept asking herself as the trucks rolled back into her ranch. The sun was bleeding out over the horizon, painting the Wyoming hills in amber and gold. Dust hung in the air like smoke after a battle. She stood on her porch, silent, hands clasped together, staring out toward the road where the last glimmers of light cut through the haze. Jake Cooper leaned against his truck beside her, arms folded. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They'd both been here before, that strange, hollow calm after the chaos. The world slows down, your pulse stops hammering, and you start hearing things again. Wind, crickets, your own heartbeat. But this time was different. This wasn't a foreign country. This was home. Down in the valley, headlights began to appear, first one, then several. Victor Kane and the remainder of his men. They were coming back. And Alexandra knew what that meant. The groups that had gone south and north to collect from ranchers were regrouping. They'd heard the silence on the radio, seen their men disappear. And now, fear had driven them back toward the only thing that felt like control, their leader. Victor's empire of intimidation was collapsing, and he didn't even know why yet. Jake's radio crackled. Lewis's voice came through, calm as ever. "Convoy of 24 inbound from town. ETA 5 minutes. "Copy," Jake replied. He looked at Alexandra. "You sure you want them all here?" She nodded slowly. "This ends tonight, all of it." He studied her. "There's still time to walk inside, let us handle it." She met his eyes. "You know I can't." He sighed. "Yeah, I know." The trucks repositioned, one at each side of the long driveway, angled to cover every approach. Rachel checked her sidearm, though she knew she probably wouldn't need it. Sandra adjusted her stance, scanning the perimeter with quiet focus. They didn't talk tactics. They didn't need to. Years of muscle memory handled that. This wasn't a battle. It was containment, a lesson. Dust clouds appeared again, this time closer. The rumble of motorcycles filled the valley, growing louder until it became a rolling growl of metal and fury. Victor Kane led them, his jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. The sight of his injured men sitting in the gravel in front of Alexandra's porch only fueled his rage. He dismounted first, boots crunching on the dirt. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed. No one answered. Alexandra stayed seated on the porch steps, calm, still. She looked like she belonged there, a woman of the land, not of violence. And yet, everything about her presence radiated command. Victor gestured to his men. "Pick up your brothers. We're burning this place down." "Don't," Jake said softly. The voice carried like thunder, not loud, just full of weight. 30 bikers froze. Victor turned, sneering. "Who the hell are you, cowboy?" Jake took one step forward. His boots left shallow prints in the dirt. "Someone trying to give you a chance to walk away." Victor laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. "You think 6 people can stop 35 of us?" Lewis chuckled from the left flank. "We already did." Victor's eyes darted between them, the trucks, the angles, the precision. His instinct screamed at him that this wasn't just some backwoods crew. These people moved like soldiers. "Listen," Alexandra said, standing slowly. Her voice was calm, but it carried the kind of tone that cut through noise. "You came here to take, to threaten, to break what you thought was weak. You were wrong." Victor took a step closer, fists clenched. "Lady, I'm done with your speeches. You don't scare me." She looked at him not with anger but pity. "That's your mistake. You think fear is the only way to make people listen. You've built your world on it, but fear doesn't last. Respect does." He scoffed. "Respect, you think we care about?" "Respect," she said again, firmer this time. "For life, for decency, for boundaries." Her team didn't move. They didn't have to. Their stillness was the threat. Jake finally spoke, his voice low. "Hear how this works. You're going to return every cent you took from this town, every dollar, every stolen thing. Then you're leaving Wyoming and never coming back." Victor laughed again, but it broke halfway through. "Or what?" Rachel stepped forward. Her tone was almost conversational. "Or you'll learn that what we do to people who don't listen doesn't make the news." Sandra's phone pinged. She glanced at the screen. "Sheriff's on his way with state patrol. 70 minutes turned into 30. They'll be here soon." Victor's face twisted. He looked around at his men, at the 6 silent figures surrounding them, and at Alexandra, calm, barefoot, unarmed. Something in him cracked. He charged. It wasn't smart. It wasn't tactical. It was pure ego and rage, the last gasp of a man who'd lost control. He ran up the steps, swinging. Alexandra sidestepped, caught his arm mid-swing, twisted, same joint, same lock, and this time she didn't stop short. He went down hard, face first into the dirt. Silence followed. Her knee pressed against his back, her breath steady. "You brought this on yourself," she whispered. "Do it," he spat through grit. "You think you're better than me. Go on, finish it." She hesitated. The world seemed to narrow until it was just them, the predator and the mirror of everything she could have become. For a second she saw herself in him, years ago, when she was drowning in her own anger, taking orders that blurred right and wrong. She released him. He rolled onto his back, stunned. "Why didn't you?" "Because I don't need to," she said softly. "You already lost." That was the moment Sheriff Mitchell's cruiser crested the hill, lights flashing. 2 more patrol cars followed, sirens breaking the stillness. The bikers turned, panicking. Jake raised a hand. "Nobody moves." They didn't. When the patrol cars stopped, officers stepped out cautiously, taking in the surreal sight 35 armed bikers, engines off, lined up like schoolboys under watch of 6 civilians. Sheriff Mitchell looked at Alexandra, then at Jake. "Mind explaining?" "They were trespassing," Alexandra said simply. "My friends helped me explain property rights." The sheriff stared at her for a long moment, then at the bikers, who looked more like chastised teenagers than criminals now. "You sure know how to get a point across," he said quietly. "Old habits," she replied. By sunset, the iron skulls were being handcuffed, processed, and loaded into transport vehicles. Several had outstanding federal warrants. The rest would be facing charges for extortion, assault, racketeering. Their empire, built on intimidation, had crumbled in one day. The 6 operators stood back, watching the patrol cars roll away. No cheers, no celebration, just quiet satisfaction. Rachel broke the silence first. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "you could have just called the sheriff." Alexandra shrugged, "And let you all miss the fun." Lewis laughed, "Same old ghost." Jake shook his head, "You really think this is over?" She looked toward the fading light. "It's never really over, but tonight it's enough." He nodded. "You could come back, you know. The unit would take you in a heartbeat." She smiled sadly. "I don't belong there anymore. I've seen enough death. I just want peace." Jake studied her. "Then stop fighting who you are." "I'm not fighting it," she said softly. "I'm learning to live with it." The others gathered near the porch, settling into the calm after the storm. 6 people bound by a past they couldn't explain to anyone else. They didn't need medals or recognition. They didn't even need thanks. All they needed was the unspoken truth between them. When one of us calls, we all come. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and violet. Alexandra sat back on her steps, watching the light fade. For a moment, it felt like the world was finally still. She knew better. Peace wasn't the absence of violence. It was the choice to rise above it. And sometimes, dignity doesn't shout. It simply acts. What does silence sound like after chaos? Alexandra found out the next morning. It wasn't peaceful, not at first. It was heavy, too quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm when even the birds don't trust the calm. The smell of burned rubber still clung to the air. The gravel on her driveway was scarred with tire tracks and boot prints. Empty shell casings, souvenirs from a night that would never make the news, glinted in the soft morning light. She stood barefoot again, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise from the fields. The barn door she'd been repairing the day before still leaned against the wall, unfinished. For a moment, it almost made her laugh. How something as simple as a broken hinge had been interrupted by something that could have destroyed a town. Behind her, the old porch boards creaked. Jake stepped out, already awake, his flannel rolled at the sleeves, hands in his pockets. "You sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, "Didn't try." He nodded, "Didn't think so." For a while, they didn't speak. The only sound was the wind brushing through the prairie grass. Then he said quietly, "Feds are coming." She didn't turn. "How many?" "3 vehicles. They'll take Kane and the rest. Word is, Iron Skulls were connected to a bigger network, guns, maybe trafficking. This might actually clean up half the state." "Good," she said softly. "Maybe something good comes out of it." Jake watched her a moment. "You don't look like someone who feels good about it." She took a sip of coffee. "You ever wonder how many bad men think they're the hero in their own story?" He tilted his head. "Most of them, probably." She looked out at the horizon. Victor Kane thought fear made him strong. He didn't realize it was the same thing that made him weak. "I spent 9 years doing the same thing, using fear to control outcomes. Not people maybe, but moments, missions, myself." Jake sighed. "Difference is, you used it to save lives." She turned to him, eyes tired but clear. "And that makes it better." He didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that with Ghost, silence said more than words ever could. The crunch of gravel drew their attention. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up the drive, unmarked, but official in every sense. 3 men in suits stepped out, the kind who spoke in clipped sentences and carried authority like a hidden weapon. The lead agent, tall, clean-cut, early 40s, approached with a folder in hand. "Ms. Morrison," he said politely. She nodded. "Agent." "I'm Agent Heller, Department of Justice. We'll be transferring the Iron Skulls to federal custody. You should know this operation dismantled an interstate racketeering ring. You and your friends likely prevented several violent incidents. I didn't do it for recognition, she said. Didn't think you did. He studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. You were off the grid for 2 years, no records, no contracts. The Bureau thought you were gone for good. I was, she said. He gave a small, knowing smile. Until yesterday. Jake stepped between them slightly, not aggressive, just protective. You got what you came for, Agent. Heller nodded. For now, but something tells me this isn't the last time I'll be in Clearwater. Let's hope it is, Alexandra said quietly. The agents gathered their prisoners, 35 men in chains, some limping, some refusing to meet her gaze. Victor Kane was the last to be loaded into the van. He looked different now, smaller somehow. Not because of the restraints, but because he'd seen himself reflected in someone stronger, someone who didn't need violence to command fear. He paused before stepping in. Why didn't you kill me? He asked. She met his eyes, unflinching. Because I remember what it's like to be lost. He stared at her for a long second, searching for anger, for pride, found none. Just calm. That quiet, unsettling calm. Then he looked away and stepped into the van. The doors shut, engines started. The convoy disappeared down the dirt road. Silence again. Jake let out a long breath. You handled that better than most generals I've met. I'm not a general, she said. No, he replied, you're something rarer. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. That evening the crew gathered one last time on her porch. The Wyoming sky stretched wide, burning pink and orange. Sandra handed her a cold drink. To ghosts that don't stay buried, she said with a grin. Alexandra raised her slightly, and to friends who still answer the call. Lewis leaned back in his chair. You know, I kinda missed this. Rachel laughed. You mean the fighting? No, he said, the family. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. The air was cool, sweet, alive. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang, haunting, lonely, beautiful. When the first stars began to appear, Jake stood. We should head out, long drive back. Alexandra nodded. Thanks for everything. Sandra hugged her briefly. Call sooner next time, preferably before it hits code silver. Rachel smiled. You still got that quiet strength, Ghost. Some things don't fade. Lewis clapped her on the shoulder. You're still our six. David just gave her a look that said everything: loyalty, gratitude, respect. When they were gone, the night felt larger somehow, the kind of quiet that hums with memory. She walked out to the barn, lantern in hand, and finally finished fixing that broken door. Each hammer strike echoed softly in the stillness. It wasn't about the door, it never was. It was about control, not over violence, not over others, but over her own peace. When she finished, she stood there for a long time, hand resting on the smooth wood. Tomorrow she'd check the northern pasture, maybe patch the fence line, ordinary things, human things. She looked up at the sky, stars endless and cold, and whispered to no one, maybe that's enough. Because for people like her, peace wasn't found in the absence of battle. It was found in the courage to live after it. And sometimes that's the hardest mission of all. How do you go back to normal after the world remembers your name? Alexandra Morrison woke before dawn like always. The sky was still a deep shade of blue, the air sharp and cool. The smell of rain clung to the grass. For a long moment she just stood on her porch, breathing. She'd always liked the sound of morning here, the wind against the barn, the low hum of cattle, the faint creak of the old weather vane spinning somewhere out in the dark. It used to mean peace. Now it only reminded her how quickly peace could vanish. The iron skulls were gone, federal custody, dozens of charges pending. The town was quiet again. The cafe had reopened. The hardware store replaced its windows. People smiled at her when she drove by, waved a little longer than usual. Gratitude, respect, curiosity. But behind their smiles, she saw it, the question they wouldn't ask aloud. Who are you really? And she didn't have an answer she liked. The news had reached beyond Clearwater. Whispers of some ex-military woman taking down a biker gang in Wyoming. The reports never used her real name, but the military grapevine did. And once the operators started talking, it spread like wildfire. Ghost was alive, and she just lit up the radar of every agency that had spent 2 years assuming she'd retired quietly. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, messages from old handlers, from analysts she barely remembered. They all said the same thing in different ways. We need you back. She ignored them. At least she tried to. She filled her days with work fixing fences, mending saddles, tending to horses. The rhythm of it helped, the simplicity, the ache in her hands felt honest, real. But the quiet didn't stop the memories. They came uninvited, flashes of Kandahar, of sand whipping her face, of blood and smoke and radio static that screamed through the dark. The sound of Cooper's voice calling her name through gunfire. The image of Martinez dragging a wounded civilian through a collapsing alleyway. And the one she couldn't save. The little boy in Aleppo, the medic in Yemen, the hostage in Somalia who'd smiled right before the explosion. Peace had a way of magnifying ghosts. By the third night, she couldn't sleep. She walked out to the pasture, wrapped in an old flannel, the stars sharp and merciless above her. The wind was cold, but it cleared her head. That's when she saw the headlights. A single vehicle coming up the road, not fast, not aggressive, just steady. She waited by the fence, one hand resting on the old Winchester she kept near the porch. When the car stopped, the driver stepped out slowly, tall, formal posture, coat catching the wind. Agent Heller, the same man who'd led the federal pickup days ago. Mind if I step closer? He asked. She nodded once. You're already here. He approached, stopping a few feet away, his breath fogged in the cold air. You've been hard to reach. I wasn't trying to be found. He gave a small smile. Didn't figure you were, but I wanted to deliver this in person. He handed her a sealed envelope, government issue, thick paper, embossed insignia. She didn't take it. What's inside? An offer, he said, unofficial. There's a task force forming, multi-agency, international scope, covert rescue operations. They need experience. They need someone who knows the ground truth. I'm retired, she said flatly. He shrugged. You were until last week. Her jaw tightened. That was different. It always is. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind filled the space between them, whispering through the dry grass. Heller studied her, the posture, the way her eyes never really stopped scanning, even here in the dark. You can tell yourself you want peace, Ms. Morrison, but peace is a luxury built on the backs of people like you. You may not like that truth, but it's still the truth. She finally took the envelope. You done recruiting? For now, he said, but if you change your mind, the line's open. He turned and walked back to his car, taillights fatting down the road until there was only darkness again. Alexandra stood there for a long while, envelope in hand. She wanted to throw it in the dirt, burn it, forget it. But she didn't. She brought it inside, set it on the table, and walked away. For the next 2 days, she didn't touch it. She tried to lose herself in work again, sunrise to sunset. But the world had a cruel way of reminding her you can't outrun your own nature. Every sound pulled her back. The hum of a passing plane, the static of an old radio, even the creak of her porch boards sounded like boots on deployment. Her body was here, her mind was. By the 5th day, she found herself standing in front of the envelope again. Her fingers hovered over it, hesitant, trembling. She whispered to herself, don't do this. Then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Operation Seraphim. No details, just coordinates, a date, and 2 words written in pen. "We'll wait." Her breath caught. The handwriting was familiar, not Heller's. Jake Cooper's. She felt her throat tighten. Of course. He'd known this was coming. Maybe he'd even told them where to find her. She wanted to be angry, but instead she felt something worse. She felt understood. That night rain rolled in. The kind that comes heavy and steady, drumming against the tin roof, seeping into everything. She sat by the window, staring at the dark horizon, the letter folded beside her coffee mug. She could almost hear his voice again, Jake's steady tone from years ago, when they'd sat in a broken-down Jeep outside Kabul. "You don't choose this life, Ghost," he'd said. "It chooses you. You just decide how much of your soul you're willing to spend on it." She laughed then, thought he was just being poetic. Now she understood. Because every time she tried to build something quiet, something peaceful, the world came knocking. And she always answered. By midnight, the letter was still on the table, damp at the corners from her fingers. She finally picked it up and tucked it into her jacket. She didn't know yet if she'd go. But she knew she couldn't throw it away. Outside, the storm raged. The ranch lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the plains. She whispered to herself, barely audible, not a promise, not a confession, just a truth. Peace isn't something you find, it's something you fight for. And in that quiet, rain-soaked house, Alexandra Morrison, call sign Ghost, realized her war might not be over. It had just changed shape. What happens when the world won't let you be done fighting? For 6 days, Alexandra told herself she wasn't going. She told herself the same thing every morning, out loud sometimes, as if words could make it true. "I'm not going." Then she'd saddle her horse, check the northern pasture, walk the fence line, mend what was broken. By evening, she'd end up on the porch again, staring at the envelope still lying on her table, the paper soft from being handled too many times. She'd fold it, unfold it, read the words she already knew by heart. Operation Seraphim, coordinates will wait. Each time she read it, she felt something stir, the old instinct, the pulse beneath her calm, the part of her that used to wake up in war zones and move without hesitation. But that part came with ghosts. She spent 9 years carrying faces she couldn't forget, and peace, fragile as glass, was the only thing she'd built to keep them quiet. If she left now, if she answered this call, she wasn't sure she'd come back to who she'd been trying to become. But still, she couldn't stop thinking about why they'd sent it to her. Seraphim. The name echoed in her mind, heavy with the kind of secrecy she used to live under. Covert rescue, multi-agency, high risk. It wasn't a coincidence. Jake had written it himself. His handwriting wasn't just a request. It was a test. "We'll wait." It wasn't the first time he'd written those words to her. She remembered the last one. Kandahar 2016. A night raid gone wrong. 3 operatives pinned in a collapsing structure, comms jammed, extraction window closing. Jake's last transmission before radio silence had been short, deliberate. "We'll wait, Ghost." She'd gone back in alone. Dragged them out one by one. And when the dust cleared, they never talked about how close they'd come to dying. Only that one line remained between them, the unspoken promise. When one of us calls, the others wait. Now it was her turn to answer. But she wasn't that person anymore. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. On the 7th morning, she drove into Clearwater. People waved, some smiled, some whispered. The town that once didn't know her now looked at her like a legend. The sheriff stopped her outside the cafe. "Morning, Alex," Tom said, leaning on his truck. "Morning, Sheriff." He nodded toward the envelope in her hand, still thinking about it. She blinked, surprised. "You know." Tom smiled faintly. Agent Heller came by yesterday. Wanted to thank the department again for our cooperation. Guess he doesn't realize I've been around long enough to smell recruitment when it's that close. Alexandra exhaled, a soft laugh escaping her. Guess I'm not very subtle. You never were. He studied her face for a moment, the fatigue behind her calm. You know, folks here like you. Town's quieter now because of what you did. You don't owe anyone more than that. She nodded, I know. Then don't let the past convince you that peace is cowardice. She met his eyes. You really think that's what I'm afraid of? Tom smiled. I think you're afraid of finding out who you are without a fight. The words hit harder than she expected. That night she dreamed. It was the same dream she'd had for years. Heat, dust, screams muffled by static, the smell of burning oil and iron. She was back in the compound, walls closing in, air thick with smoke. Her team shouting through the noise, a child's cry in the distance, the countdown ticking in her earpiece. Then the explosion, light swallowing everything. She woke gasping, heart hammering, drenched in sweat. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Ranch, bedroom, home. Except it didn't feel like home, not anymore. She walked outside, barefoot on the wet grass. The moon hung low over the plains, silver and cold. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled again, or maybe it was memory pretending to be thunder. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she answered. No greeting, no name, just a familiar voice on the other end. Ghost, Jake said quietly. Her throat tightened. Cooper. It's time. She closed her eyes. Seraphim. Extraction window opens in 36 hours. We're regrouping in Cheyenne. We won't move without you. Silence. He let it stretch. He knew her well enough to let her fight it out in her head before he said anything more. Finally he added, you can say no, we'll understand. She almost did. But something in the way he said we'll understand carried a weight she couldn't ignore, the kind that wasn't really permission. It was faith. The same kind she'd given him years ago when she'd carried him bleeding through a firefight. She breathed in slowly. What's the target? Classified, he said. For now, just come. She wanted to say no. She wanted to hang up. Instead, she whispered, send coordinates. When the call ended, she stood there in the moonlight, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The same eyes she'd seen in 1,000 mirrors across 1,000 missions. Tired, focused, alive. Ghost was back. But Alexandra wasn't sure if she'd just saved herself or lost herself again. She went inside and began to pack. Not the way a soldier packs, no weapons, no armor, just what mattered. A photograph of her parents, her father's old compass, the leather bracelet her team had given her when she retired, braided with 6 strands, one for each of them. She ran her fingers over it, tracing the knots, remembering each story behind it. Cooper, Martinez, Taylor, Kim, Bennett, herself. 6 people bound by something deeper than duty. Loyalty. Sacrifice. Love, though none of them ever said it out loud. When dawn came, the sky was painted in pale gold. She loaded her truck, stood by the porch one last time and looked out across the fields. Every inch of this land had been a promise that she could live like a normal person, love quietly, exist without orders or blood. Now it was just a reminder. Some promises aren't meant to last forever. She whispered to the wind, I'll come back. But even she didn't believe it. The tires rolled across the gravel. The ranch grew smaller in the rearview mirror. And as the road opened up before her, wide and empty beneath the rising sun, Alexandra Morrison, Ghost, drove toward Cheyenne. Back to the world she swore she'd never see again. Because peace can wait. But when the ones who once waited for you need you back, you don't stay silent. You answer. How many times can you leave a war before it finds you again? Cheyenne was colder than she remembered. Wind swept across the airfield like a blade, cutting through her jacket as she stepped out of the truck. The hangar ahead of her was dimly lit, half concealed by fog that rolled low along the tarmac. She paused for a moment, hand resting on the strap of her duffel, eyes tracing the silhouettes moving inside. 5 figures. Her team. She hadn't seen them all together in almost 3 years. Jake Cooper was the first to turn. He didn't smile, not because he wasn't glad to see her, but because soldiers like him didn't waste words on what didn't need saying. His nod was enough. "Ghost," he said simply. "Cooper," she replied, the name tasting like old dust and old loyalty. Behind him, the others looked up from their gear. Luis Martinez, thicker now, slower maybe, but the same steady hands that once dismantled an IED blindfolded. Rachel Taylor, her expression softer, her eyes sharper, calm as a scalpel. Sandra Kim, quiet, unreadable, tapping something on her tablet with precision that could cut glass. David Bennett, still the ghost inside the ghost's team, watching everything and speaking only when it mattered. One by one they met her eyes. And for a brief second the years fell away. It was as if the deserts, the jungles, the black sites, all the fire and silence had never ended. They were home again. "Glad you came," Lewis said, breaking the stillness. "I almost didn't," Alexandra replied. "But you did," Rachel smiled faintly. "You always do." Sandra closed her tablet. "You've seen the brief." Alexandra shook her head. "Just the code name." Jake motioned for her to follow. "Then you're in for a ride." They walked deeper into the hangar. At its center stood a black transport helicopter, markings stripped, rotors idle. Around it were crates, stacked and sealed, stamped with numbers and nothing else. A small folding table held a laptop, 2 folders, and a map pinned down with a knife. Jake pulled the knife free, flipped the top folder open and began. Operation Seraphim. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's a joint task under DOJ, CIA, and one foreign ally we're not nomming. Target zone, 240 miles southeast of Istanbul. Small rural area near the Syrian border. Objective: recover 3 American nationals kidnapped by rogue elements connected to the arms trade. He looked at her. "One of them's a journalist." Alexandra frowned. "And the others?" "Humanitarian workers, off the grid for 3 weeks." "Why us?" she asked. Jake's jaw tightened. "Because everyone else who's tried has disappeared." The words hung in the air, heavy. Sandra added quietly, "We've lost 2 reconnaissance teams already. Whoever's behind it, they're organized. Military precision. Someone trained them." Alexandra leaned over the map. "Coordinates." Rachel slid a finger across the paper, stopping near a red circle drawn in pencil. "They call it the Haven, abandoned compound, but satellite imagery shows heat signatures, movement, patterns consistent with holding cells." Lewis crossed his arms. "It's not just a rescue ghost, it's a ghost hunt." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Jake exhaled. "We think the ringleader used to be one of ours." Silence again. The kind that made even the hum of the lights feel too loud. "Name?" she asked. Jake hesitated, then said it. "Major Thomas Red." Alexandra's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard that name in 5 years. Red, the strategist, the one they used to call Prophet because he could predict enemy moves 3 steps ahead. Brilliant, dangerous, and in the end, broken. She'd seen it happen, watched him unravel after his last deployment, questioning orders, questioning leadership, questioning everything. Then one day he vanished. No discharge papers, no contact, just gone. And now, apparently, he was running the kind of operation they used to stop. "Tell me this isn't confirmed," she whispered. Jake's voice was low. "We have biometrics, it's him." Alexandra's throat felt dry. And you didn't tell me that before I came because. Because you wouldn't have. He wasn't wrong. She looked at the map again, tracing the routes with her finger, forcing herself to breathe. When do we leave? Wheels up in 4 hours. Louis grinned, just like old times. But it was not really. Because this mission wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. She walked away from the group, needing a moment. The hangar was quiet except for the wind rattling the metal panels. Her reflection in the side of the helicopter looked older, harder. Rachel followed her quietly. You okay? Define okay. Rachel smiled gently. You ever going to stop pretending you're fine? Alexandra sighed. If I ever do, it's over. Rachel's smile faded. Maybe that's the point. For a long time, they stood there in silence. Finally, Alexandra said, You think Red really went rogue? Rachel hesitated. I think people break in different ways. Some turn inward. Some turn violent. Some start believing they're saving the world by destroying it. Alexandra nodded slowly. And what about us? Rachel looked at her. We're the ones trying to clean up the pieces. When the briefing resumed, the tone shifted. Checklists, coordinates, loadouts, extraction times, the language of professionals who had made peace with impossible odds. But Alexandra couldn't focus. Every instruction sounded distant, muted beneath the hum of memory. Red, the man who once taught her how to survive ambushes, how to trust instincts over intel. The man who'd once told her, You don't win wars by being righteous. You win by being relentless. And now she was about to hunt him. When the meeting ended, Jake lingered. You sure you're ready for this? No, she said honestly, but I'll go anyway. He smiled, small but real. That's why we waited. By nightfall, the team was in motion, gear loaded, fuel topped off, rotors spinning slow and heavy in the darkness. Alexandra stood by the ramp, headset in hand, staring out across the runway. The city lights glittered in the distance, fragile and far. She whispered under her breath, One more mission. Then she stepped inside. The ramp closed. The noise swallowed her words. As the helicopter lifted into the stormlit night, rain streaking across the windows, she thought of the ranch, the horses, the fields, the unfinished piece she'd left behind. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. But somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, beneath the weariness of too many ghosts, there was something else. Something steady. Purpose. Because even when peace feels like a dream, some people were never meant to dream too long. They were meant to wake the world up. They called it the Haven. But there was nothing holy about it. 2 hours before dawn, the team hovered low over the Turkish border. The mountains below looked like the spine of some great sleeping beast, dark and unmoving. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists right before something terrible begins. Alexandra sat near the rear of the helicopter, hands steady, eyes closed. She didn't pray, not because she didn't believe, but because prayer felt like something for people who still hoped for clean endings. She learned long ago that in their line of work, no one walked out clean. Jake's voice came through the headset. 3 clicks out, touchdown in 2 minutes. Copy, she replied. Around her, the team moved with the silent precision of people who had lived too many lifetimes in one. Sandra checked her feed, relaying drone visuals. Rachel assembled her medical kit. Louis adjusted the suppressor on his rifle. David loaded his comms scrambler. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The rhythm between them was muscle memory. The helicopter banked, descended into a canyon, and the world narrowed into motion, the drop, the rush, the thud of boots hitting foreign soil. They moved fast, low, silent. The compound was nestled between cliffs, an old Soviet-era research station turned fortress. Chain-link fences, corrugated metal roofs, floodlights sweeping across sand and stone. Sandra whispered, 6 guards on rotation, 2 on the east watchtower, patrol every 7 minutes. Jake nodded, Ghost, you're with me, Rachel and Lewis south entrance, Kim Bennett overwatch. Alexandra's voice was calm, on your mark. Mark! They slipped through shadow like wraiths, boots silent, breathing shallow, every sound magnified, every step deliberate. At the fence line, Alexandra knelt, cutting a narrow section with a small thermal blade. The smell of hot metal filled the air. She slipped through first, signaling clear. Jake followed. They crossed the inner yard, hugging the edges of buildings, moving toward the central structure where the heat signatures clustered. Rachel's voice whispered over comms, South team in position, 1 tango down, no alarm. Sandra followed, overwatch clear, cameras looped. Inside the main structure, the walls were scarred concrete, no markings, no windows, just long corridors lit by flickering bulbs. The air stank of oil and sweat. Jake glanced at Alexandra, 2 minutes to target room. They reached the final door, heavy, reinforced, voices inside. She pressed her ear against the cold metal, heard something she hadn't expected. Laughter. A low, steady voice speaking English, calm, confident, familiar. Jake mouthed one word, red. Alexandra's pulse spiked, but her face didn't change. They breached. It happened fast, a flash of movement, a burst of light, controlled chaos. Lewis tackled 1 guard, Rachel disarmed another, Sandra shut down the security feed. Within seconds, the room was under their control. And at its center, sitting behind a metal desk, was Major Thomas Red. Older, thinner, eyes hollow but burning with something dangerous, conviction. He didn't move as the team surrounded him. He just looked up, smiled faintly. Ghost, he said, I was wondering when you'd come. Her stomach turned. You knew we were coming. Of course, he said. You think I didn't recognize the pattern? 6 operators, Delta-style formation, that's your signature. Jake stepped closer. Stand down, Red, it's over. Red laughed softly. Over. You think this is over because you broke into 1 compound. You still believe in good and evil, Cooper. You still think we're the heroes. 3 hostages, Alexandra said. Where are they? He looked at her, amused. You still don't get it, do you? They're not prisoners, they're volunteers. Sandra moved fast, checking the far corner, cages empty. Jake's voice was a low growl. You're lying. Red stood slowly. I told them the truth, that we don't save the world anymore, we stabilize it. 1 death at a time. You think Washington does? No, they do. They always did. Alexandra's jaw clenched. You turned mercenary. I turned honest, he said, stepping closer. You of all people should understand that. She raised her weapon slightly. Don't. He smiled. You won't shoot me. You're still trying to be better than what we made you. He was right, and that made it worse. Before she could answer, a distant explosion shook the compound. Contact, Lewis shouted. North Gate, multiple hostiles inbound. Jake spun toward the window, black SUVs cresting the ridge, headlights cutting through the dark. Sandra cursed. We've been played, he called them in. Red smirked. Did you really think I was alone? Jake grabbed his radio. Kim Bennett overwatch suppress. Gunfire erupted outside, sharp and relentless. The team moved automatically, returning fire, falling into defensive formation. Alexandra shoved Red to the ground, zip-tying his wrists. You brought them here. Why? He looked up at her, smiling through the chaos. Because peace is an illusion, Ghost. You of all people should know order requires monsters, and we are very good at making monsters. Her pulse thundered. You don't get to use that word anymore. Jake barked. Extraction in 3 minutes, move. They fought their way out, bullets sparking off metal, smoke filling the corridors. Sandra covered the rear. Rachel dragged one of the hostages alive, terrified, from a locked room. Lewis hauled another. The third was gone. Alexandra kept Red in front of her, forcing him through the chaos. Outside, rain had started. The helicopter roared overhead, spotlights slicing through the storm. They ran through mud, through gunfire, through the ghosts of every mission they'd ever survived. Jake shouted over the noise, "Ghost, get him in the bird." Red stumbled, laughed again. "You can't save them all, Ghost, you never could." She turned, weapon raised. For a moment everything slowed, the storm, the bullets, the shouting, just her and him. Red met her eyes. "You know I'm right." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel anger. She felt pity. She lowered her gun. "You used to be better than this." He smiled. "So did you." The next second he moved fast, desperate, reaching for her weapon. A single shot echoed through the storm. He fell. Silence followed, the kind that makes you forget to breathe. She stared at him lying there, rain washing the blood from his chest, until Jake's hand gripped her shoulder. "Ghost," he said softly, "we have to go." She nodded, numb, and followed him to the helicopter. They lifted off as dawn broke over the mountains, light spilling across the wreckage below. The hostages huddled in blankets. Sandra sat bleeding but alive. Lewis checked ammunition he didn't need anymore. Rachel stared out the window, lost in thought. Jake looked at Alexandra. "You did what you had to do." She shook her head. "No, I did what he made me do." He didn't argue. He knew there were no clean truths in their world. When they landed hours later at a secure base, the sun was already high. The air smelled of dust and diesel. Alexandra stepped off the ramp and felt the ground beneath her boots, solid, real heavy. Heller was there waiting. He gave a small nod. "Mission accomplished. You saved 2 lives, that's a win." She stared past him. "And how many did we lose before we got here?" He hesitated. "That's above my pay grade." She almost laughed. "Yeah, that's what they all say." When night came, she sat alone outside the barracks, watching the stars. Jake joined her, sitting without speaking. After a while, she said quietly, "Red wasn't wrong about everything. The world does need monsters sometimes." Jake nodded. "Maybe, but monsters don't get to choose who they hurt. We do." She thought about that, the difference between control and chaos, between violence and purpose. Then she said, almost to herself, "I think I'm done, Jake, for real this time." He smiled, tired. "You said that before." She looked at him, her expression softening. "Maybe I'll mean it this time." He stood. "Then we'll wait." When he walked away, she sat there a long time, the wind cold against her face. Later, when the transport plane took them home, she watched the sunrise again, the same way she had after every mission. Only this time, it didn't look like survival. It looked like forgiveness. Weeks later, back on her ranch, the world had already moved on. The headlines faded. The phone stopped ringing. And one morning, Alexandra Morrison was once again just a woman fixing a fence line, quiet, barefoot, sun on her back. No weapons, no missions, just breath, just peace. But every now and then, when the wind shifted and the silence deepened, she'd hear it again, that single line from long ago. "We'll wait." She smiled faintly, not haunted, not broken, just remembering. Because some bonds don't die in battlefields. They live in the spaces between wars. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.